Hey, greetings everybody, it's Gleekon, back at you again with another episode of Lore of Warcraft. On our last episode, we finished off our first starting zone, which was Durotar. I finished off a couple others off camera, but we've officially finished off Durotar, and we still are going to explore Orgrimmar before we move on to the next zone. We did it with the Troll Rogue. I've also done it with an Orc Warrior off camera. There is something I wanted to do now that I think about it. I guess we'll do it on the capital level episodes. We'll go back and we'll do what we did in the starting zones, and we'll kind of read through any class specific quests that we didn't get to in those particular zones. For instance, I already completed the Hunter. There's 3 or 4 quests in the in Dunmorag for a Hunter to get your pet. So I thought about making a short video just where I completed those 4, but the text is probably just fine. So when we do the gnome on the next episode, we'll talk about that. And at the very end, maybe when we do Ironforge, we'll come back and we'll cover these quests. It'll sort of be like a recap thing that I try to do, I think, at the end of each one. Just like tacking on at the end of episodes. So if you're not really interested in any of the lore or those really thorough extra reading the quests, we'll just skip it over. Okay, cool. So we also been reading Lands of Mystery, the Dungeons & Dragons World of Warcraft campaign setting, and this book is from Bran Bronzebeard's perspective. We covered every zone between this book and a previous one geographically, and now we've started looking at a couple of the races that we haven't talked about, some of the more esoteric races. We talked about the Blue Dragonflight, and now on this one, stay a while and listen as we discuss the Magnataur. I'm kind of excited about this. This is a pretty cool race that I don't know a ton about. Azeroth has many hybrid races, creatures that resemble 2 different species put together, but the Magnataur are unique among them for many reasons. First, they are by far the largest. A Magnataur resembles a centaur, but on a colossal scale. A Magnataur's lower half is that of a woolly mammoth, and in total, they are about 20 to 30 feet tall and weigh 15 to 20 tons. That's a lot of monster right there. And I use the term monster for a reason. Magnataur are pure evil, brutal and uncaring, even beyond the level associated with the centaur. And as we've quested both the centaur and the Magnataur, there are reasonable neutral versions of each. In fact, the Maracai or whoever we're working with in Dragonflight are downright good. Magnataur are also unusual in that we have no idea where they came from. While they obviously resemble centaur, dryads, and other hybrid races, they do not appear to be descendants of Cenarius. My theory is that they are in some way related to one of the old gods, but there is little to confirm or dispute this idea. They do not worship the old gods or any gods at all, and I have yet to find any writings that detail their creation, even through legends or hearsay. Magnataur never played a major role in the history of humanoid societies, but there is a potential for that to change in the coming years. The overwhelming majority of Magnataur are powerful melee fighters, charging into combat and using fear and massive clubs as their only weapons. Still, a few more specialized Magnataur exist, including the shamans that often dominate small groups of their kind, and a few rare hunters, scouts, and rogues. Regardless of their specialty, Magnataur are among the deadliest creatures of Northrend, if not the world in general. They are a dying breed, but their recent desperation leads them to levels of cooperation never before seen, and this could prove disastrous for the other mortal races living on the glacial continent. Description. Generally speaking, Magnataur are raiders, and they spend most of their lives pillaging caravans, small towns, and even full-size cities on the rare occasions that they work together as a group. Magnataur are one of few races that rarely even get along with other members of their own species, and these disagreements usually lead to bloodshed. For this reason, there are thankfully few Magnataur left in the world. A few too many, if you ask me. Come on, Bran, that's genocidal, man. Due to their large size, Magnataur are constantly hungry, and they eat almost anything. When raiding a caravan, they eat the humans, pack animals, and whatever else they can find that won't break their teeth. Magnataur are intelligent enough to know that humanoid creatures can provide food for them. I found a few historical mentions of Magnataur setting up kingdoms and making humans into slave labor to provide them with nourishment. Such kingdoms don't last long, as Magnataur are universally too impatient to deal with such situations for long. Those Magnataur who tire of a lifestyle of raiding often take up fishing or whaling. Whales are considered a delicacy among Magnataur, and those who are able to catch them frequently are highly respected. That sounds gross, like elephant people eating whales. Like, I don't know, something about that seems cannibalistic. Appearance. A Magnataur has the lower body of a woolly mammoth and the upper body of a humanoid with massive mammoth tusks. Their humanoid halves are well muscled and often bearded, resembling dwarves or fierce humans on a massive scale. They wear little clothing, although the shamans often adorn themselves with stolen jewelry. Typically, the size of a Magnataur is directly related to its place in society. The largest and strongest are almost always dominant, and this is true even of spellcasters. I believe that Magnataur continue to grow throughout their lives, and thus the oldest are also the largest, strongest, and most powerful. Regions. The only places where large numbers of Magnataur dwell are the Dragon Blight and the Storm Peaks on Northrend. In the past, they inhabited a larger portion of Northrend, but they have suffered as many losses to the Scourge as any other race. I'm trying to think about if there's any other zones that they might exist in. I do think there are some outside of that expansion, but we'll have to pay attention when we play Wrath of the Lich King. Faith. Most Magnataur have no specific religious beliefs, although many have superstitions that are passed on within a specific family. There are a few shamans among the Magnataur race, but their perverted concept of shamanism is most comparable to that of the forest trolls. For example, Magnataur shamans often sacrifice large numbers of humanoids in their barbaric rituals. Of course, they still eat the remains afterward. Overall, most Magnataur distrust magic, although they fear only the most powerful spellcasters such as dragons. History. The history of the Magnataur race is largely shrouded in mystery, but we do know that at one point in time they were a dominant race. The shattered remnants of a few crude Magnataur kingdoms have been found, but they are all extremely crude and underdeveloped by modern standards, having never progressed beyond the point of making simple tools and structures. A few early writings exist from cultures of humans who were kept as slaves by Magnataur, but not many. And would it be humans? Maybe. Society. Most Magnataur live much of their lives alone, and as such no formal society exists among the majority of them. A small number of tribal groups exist, and in these cases they are held together by their mutual fear of their shaman leader. In most cases, these small tribal groups end with the assassination of their leader, but a few shamans have been strong enough to hold the tribe together for a number of years. The only system of rank that Magnataur understand is dictated by power, and thus a larger or more combat-worthy Magnataur is always considered superior. The race as a whole is not formal enough to have an elite group of warriors, though small groups of powerful shamans do exist. These shamans are considered the leaders of the Magnataurs as a whole, although they lack any formal institution of this leadership. Male and female Magnataur differ only in that females have a slightly greater obligation to care for their children for a few years after childbirth. There's no mating season for Magnataur, they simply mate when they feel like it, and the pair separates, often never to see each other again. Children are taught basic hunting, weapon making, and language skills from their mothers, then abandoned when they're old enough to hunt on their own. Experienced Magnataur tend to advance as warriors or scouts. A few rare and powerful Magnataur also learn the path of shamanism or advance enough as warriors to become gladiators. There have been a few arcanists, rune masters, and inscribers in the history of Magnataur, but they are rare. Hunters are not unheard of among their number, but they are looked down upon for favoring ranged weapons over melee. Due to their size, it is difficult for Magnataur to become rogues, but a rare few exist. They are incapable of the kind of stealth most rogues enjoy, but specialize instead in setting traps and ambushes. Paladins, priests, witch doctors, and druids do not exist among the Magnataur. Okay, because they don't revere the light at all. Mentality. Strength means everything to Magnataur, and they listen only to those who they feel are strong enough to threaten them or can somehow feed their gluttonous appetites. A given Magnataur largely considers other creatures, including other Magnataur, inferior. For the most part, a Magnataur lacks long-term goals, save to grow more powerful and find ideal supplies of food. Outsiders are viewed as food, threats, or providers of food. There are few exceptions. Magnataur are wise enough to give dragons a wide berth and know that invading the territory of a dragon can be deadly. Likewise, they avoid the Scourge, knowing that the undead are dangerous and taste icky. Magnataur attack adventurers on sight, holding back only if they feel the adventurers could potentially have something to offer them, which is a rarity. Relations. Since there is no formal Magnataur society, they never go to war as a whole, and thus they largely try to avoid the threat of the Scourge, dragons, and anything else they cannot handle individually. Magnataur routinely attack ice trolls and Tuskar, pillaging their villages for food and supplies. Generally, Tuskar defend themselves well against such attacks, and the Drakari simply take their losses. Occasionally, a troll leader grows infuriated at the Magnataur raids and sends out a massive group to hunt the creatures, but such an expedition usually ends up with so many troll casualties that future generations remember that retaliation is not worth the cost. Murlocs often try to serve Magnataur in an effort to save their own lives, and it occasionally works for a while. Most of the time, though, Magnataur can't resist the taste of Murloc and end up eating their slaves. Ew. Furbolgs know to hide from Magnataur attacks, and Magnataur find them irritating to hunt, and thus only the most desperate or skilled of Magnataur try to hunt a Furbolg. Magnataur have no allies, including among their own race. Now, a major difference here from this and launch is they definitely ally and enslave kobolds. Or snowbolds, maybe. Distinguishing characteristics. Most Magnataur never learn to read or write, including many of the shamans, and thus there's little written culture left behind from the rare instances where they've set up small civilizations. Their buildings are simple wooden structures at best, and while a few cave paintings have been found, they create little art. Generally, abandoned weapons, dishes for eating, and simple beds are the most intricate works left behind in their settlements. Perhaps the most unique creations of Magnataur are their sacrificial chambers, where a number of crude wooden or metal cages hold prisoners as they are burned alive in a central ring of fire. The easiest way to distinguish a Magnataur ruin from any other is the sheer number of objects that have been crushed by massive force. When Magnataur leave a city, they intentionally destroy anything they consider valuable that they cannot take with them, and they can be amazingly thorough. I suspect that this is because they used the destruction of their own cities as a way of alleviating the frustration of having to move to another home. Alright, so here's some leaders. It says the following are Magnataur leaders. Gromthar the Thunderbringer. He's a Thunderbringer shaman. The eldest living shaman of the Magnataur race and one of their strongest warriors as well. From his home in the Dragonblight, he commands about 50 other Magnataur, which is quite an impressive feat. As he continues to gain support, he plans to attack a large civilization, likely the nearby trolls, to force them into servitude. Damia Frostcut is a female Magnataur rune master, is a solitary individual who moves from one cave to another in the Dragonblight and occasionally at other places in Northrend. Other Magnataur seek her out for advice, assistance, or temporary alliance. She has a voracious appetite even for a Magnataur and places no limits on the sorts of things she ingests. I wonder if those two are in the game. We shall pay attention. Magnataur adventure hooks. Okay, so I guess if you wanted to adventure them. For the first time in their existence, the Magnataur unite under a single ruler, Gromthar the Thunderbringer. Hundreds of the massive beasts prepare for war against the other races of the world. The Blue Dragonflight calls for the extermination of the Magnataur after one of their young is killed in a Magnataur ritual, and the Tuskar village is shattered by a group of Magnataur, and the survivors seek the help of adventurers for protection and revenge. So Magnataur as player characters, so this just goes through the stats, the rules, this is what we did before, how to use monsters as a race, this is all D&D technicalities, their trample attacks, how to be a warrior. It says they don't count as multi-class, basically XP penalty. The Thunderbringer and Magnataur, the different types. We have some descriptions of what they are. But yeah, this is all just, like, I don't know what this is a description. I guess this is a description of the general Magnataur. This creature has the upper body of a giant and the lower body of a woolly mammoth. It is fearsome to behold as it strides forward, its mighty feet making the ground quake with each step. Oh yeah, this is just about it. We're already almost done. These are the most common members of Magnataur society, and they typically live as hunters and raiders. They are aware that their presence strikes fear in the hearts of lesser creatures and delight in using its disadvantage to terrify their prey. So this is just how they fight in combat. They have a frightful presence, a trample, and then the Magnataur Thunderbringer. At well over 30 feet in height, this massive elephant humanoid crossbreed is a terrible sight. Teeth and ears of victims form a crude necklace around the beast's neck, and it holds a sharpened tree as a massive club in its right hand. The creature grins wickedly as it begins to chant in an unearthly voice, with the following description. Thunderbringers are rare, elite, and powerful Magnataur. While shaman are not uncommon among Magnataur, few undergo the appropriate rituals that transform them from simple Magnataur shamans to Thunderbringers. Those who do rarely survive long. Thunderbringers represent the elite few who have survived years of assassination attempts and continue to grow in power and prominence over time. In addition to their great spellcasting abilities, they're also some of the largest and strongest of Magnataur, making them even more formidable adversaries. And they just go on to describe how they fight and what their spells are, how they have, there's maybe 7 levels of spells. And then there's the Magnataur Community Bloodmar. I do think that's the place you go. Population 53. Very specific. Bloodmar is a massive tribe by Magnataur standards with over 50 members in its ranks. Led by the mighty Gromthar, the Thunderbringer, they continue to build their numbers and gather resources in preparation for making war on the other races of the world. Fortunately, it would appear that they will be fighting against the Scourge first, since the undead are the most imminent threat. Their encampment boasts spiked wooden walls and gates, which are the most advanced defenses I've seen in a Magnataur settlement. They also appear to be stockpiling resources in a nearby cave system, which is much more organization than I'm used to seeing from Magnataur. In general, these creatures are no different from other Magnataur, but they have somehow been whipped into a group by their leader, who uses promises of great power to prevent them from slaughtering each other. He threatens swift and painful death if they betray him. All right, cool. So, we got another episode in the pipe, 5x5. We have a beginning to talk about Magnataur, although I'm sure we'll flesh that out in some other lore. Thank you so much for watching and for listening. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode of Lore of Warcraft.